The BRS 3000 has been an affordable and reliable option for lightweight backpackers for years. I have used mine on many trips and have been so happy with it that I haven't even considered looking for a different stove. However, the Dirt Junkies over at Patreon recently picked the SOTO Amicus stove as a piece of gear they'd like me to review and then give away to one of them. And I have to say, I am really glad they did, because this little stove is awesome. The question is it worth paying more than double for this stove what you would pay for this one? Let's find out. Now, I know price and weight are a big deal, so let's get those out of the way right off the bat. The SOTO Amicus stove you can pick up on Amazon for about $46. You can also get it on Garage Grown Gear and REI for $50. But right now, the REI listing actually also includes a 500 milliliter pot and a 1000 milliliter pot within that $50 price. So if you're looking at getting the SOTO Amicus stove and want a couple pots thrown in, definitely check out the REI listing, and I'll include links to Amazon, Garage Grown Gear, and REI all below in the pinned comment as well as the description. Now, the BRS stove you can get for $17 on Amazon or $20 on Garage Grown Gear. And while it's a few dollars more at Garage Grown Gear, if you want to support a small company selling lots of awesome ultralight backpacking gear, pick it up from Garage Grown Gear and throw a few other ultralight backpacking goodies in your cart at the same time. And with each stove, you do get a nice little carry bag. This is the one that comes with the BRS stove. It's lightweight, the stove fits in there just fine. The SOTO Amicus stove also comes with a bag. You'll notice right off the bat it's a little bit bigger because the stove's a little bit bigger, but I do like that this bag is a little bit more heavyweight. I have more confidence that this will do a little more to protect the stove if I were to drop it or it's rattling around in my pack a little bit. So that's the price. Let's talk about the weight of both of these stoves. The SOTO Amicus is listed at 2.9 ounces. Let's see what it comes in on my scale. It says 78 grams or 2.8 ounces. If we were to add in the carry bag, it's 3.2 ounces or 91 grams. Let's see how heavy the BRS is. The stove by itself is listed at just 26 grams. On my scale, it comes in at 27, pretty close, less than 1 ounce. If we add in the carry bag, that'll put us at 1 ounce even, or 29 grams. So since we've established that you would be paying more than twice as much for the SOTO Amicus and also be carrying almost 3 times as much, we've got to make sure it will be worth the additional cost as well as the additional weight. To help us decide, let's look at the features, the performance, including how fast each stove will boil 1.5 cups of water with no wind and with wind. We'll also look at the amount of fuel that it uses in each of those. And then we'll also look at the packability of each stove. If you're like me, you like including your entire cook set in your pot. So we'll see whether or not you can do that with each stove and look at some different pot sizes. Now, before we get into the features, you should know that I'll actually be giving away this brand new SOTO Amicus stove to a Patreon member. If you want to get in on voting for what gear I should review, as well as gear giveaways and a bunch of other perks, check out the link to Patreon in the pinned comment and description below. Now, the first thing I want to point out with features is that the SOTO Amicus actually has 4 arms, whereas the BRS only has 3. And I've read different opinions online whether 4 arms or 3 arms is more stable. Honestly, 4 seems like it would be, but I can't say that I've had any issues with my BRS that only has 3 arms. I haven't ever felt like the pots that I use are unstable on just 3 arms versus 4 on the SOTO Amicus. Related to the arms, I should say that I feel like the mechanism for putting the arms up on the BRS is definitely more simple. I like what the SOTO Amicus does, but I'm honestly a little bit worried about the longevity with it just being a little more complicated and a few more moving parts. Hopefully you can see in this overhead view that the BRS is essentially you just have one rivet through these 2 pieces of metal. You fold this one up and then it just stops right there. There isn't really anything else to it. Now the SOTO has these 4 spring-loaded arms. You can see what holds them is that they sort of catch on that metal tab there. So to fold them down, you just have to sort of release it there, and then these are spring-loaded. They fold down really naturally underneath the stove. What I was saying, and I don't know if it's something to worry about or not, but you can see there's a lot more, you know, with the spring-loaded fashion that they've done this, there's just a lot more moving parts in there, and I'd be worried about dirt or other things getting in there. It's probably nothing to worry about. The BRS is definitely simpler, and while I like the way SOTO has done this, I can't speak to the longevity of whether or not the more complex arm folding is going to be any sort of an issue. Just something that I noticed when comparing the 2 stoves. The other major difference you've probably noticed in looking at these is that the SOTO Amicus has an igniter on it. This red switch, if you click, I don't know if you're able to see that, but there's a little spark, and that will ignite the fuel rather than needing a lighter in order to light the fuel that's coming out. You can get the SOTO Amicus without an igniter. I don't think it makes it that much smaller or lighter, and it's only a savings of about $5. Somebody might want to get it without an igniter, but if you're getting the SOTO Amicus, honestly, it makes sense to me to get the one with the igniter. And the other thing that we have to mention, and that you may have noticed already, is that the SOTO Amicus sort of has this lip here, and that's supposed to make it perform better in the wind. If I hold that up there, you can see that all of the holes where the gas comes out are sort of inside that little convex, I don't know. It curves down, and this lip is supposed to prevent wind from impacting the performance of the stove too much, which is pretty cool. If you look at the BRS, you can see those holes where the gas comes out are totally exposed to wind or anything else. And I have noticed that when using the BRS in the wind, the flame definitely seems to get blown around more. We'll do some comparisons with a fan so we can actually see if there's a difference in the performance of these two stoves in similar wind. All right, let's set these stoves up. We can do some performance testing right here in the Gear Cave. To test these stoves, I am using 100-gram isobutane canisters. And in order to make sure all things are equal, I actually used this new flip fuel to refill both of these small canisters because they were about half empty, to make sure that they had the same amount of fuel in them, because the amount of fuel in a canister can impact how well the stove on it works. So I got this nice big isobutane canister, used my flip fuel, it's hard to say fast, used my flip fuel in order to fill up both of these smaller canisters so we can have a nice equal test. I'm going to make sure to use the same stove on the same canister throughout all of the tests so we can get a really good idea of just how much difference there is in fuel consumption after several uses by each stove. And just in screwing this on, I'm realizing there's one other feature I should mention. You can see that the SOTO Amicus has a seal on the isobutane canister around the lip, whereas the BRS is left a little bit open. Now that doesn't really knock on the BRS. There are O-rings on the inside of this that make sure that it's sealed, but this additional sealing right here by the SOTO Amicus is just sort of an extra protection, I guess. All right, for these tests, we are using 750 milliliter titanium pots. Let's get some cold water and we'll see how these stoves do. I'll be right back. I didn't want to use room temperature water because that didn't really seem true to backpacking, so I have this water that I've been keeping in the back of the fridge. It's about 34. So pretty cold. To make sure we get the same amount in each cup or each pot, we're going to use the scale. 1.5 cups is about 354 grams. So that's what we're going to go for. 354 on that one. Let's get 354 in this one. 353, that'll be good enough. BRS on the right, SOTO on my left. Let's light them up. The SOTO boiled the same amount of water in about 2 minutes and 35 seconds. The BRS took about 3 minutes and 35 seconds. But let's weigh these canisters and see how much fuel they used. All right, now we got to take these off. We'll weigh this one. I forgot to show you the starting weight, but I actually wrote it on the side here. So this one started at 213, I think that says. Yep, 213. So now it's at 204, meaning it took 9 grams of fuel to boil 1.5 cups of water. Let's see what the other one looks like. All right, let's take the SOTO off. This one started at 212. And it is at 200, so although it boiled it faster, that makes sense because it actually used a little bit more fuel. All right, next, let's try the same thing with some wind. All right, I got the fan set up back there, so you can probably barely hear me over it. And then I actually got this device that can measure wind speed. So we're gonna try and get it just over 4 miles an hour. Looks like it's hovering about 4, 4.2, 4.5, right in front of each of these stoves. So if I look at this, that one's right around 4. And it's about the same. You can see it goes down to 3.6 and 4, 4.2. Let's light them up and see how they do. We'll light this one first. Having a hard time lighting it. Woo! Look at this flame. It's all over the place. This one's doing much better. See how even that flame is? And that one's just all over the place. You can see this far prong is getting red hot, but those ones closer to the wind aren't. This one's doing way better. Temperatures we're at, this is it. 125. This is at 116. All right, so 5 minutes. We're at 200. We're gonna call it. Woo! Let's turn the fan off. All right, so wind made a huge difference in the effectiveness of these stoves. Hopefully you can see in some of those shots just how wild the flame was on the BRS, but the SOTO Amicus flame was still pretty concentrated right under the pot. Let's weigh these canisters and see how much fuel we used. All right, so the BRS, we started at 204. We were down to 204 on the last one. 193 grams, so we used about 11 grams of fuel for that. All right, and this one, we were at 200. And now we're at 189. So they both used 11 grams of fuel, but the SOTO actually managed to boil the water, the BRS did not. All right, so a couple things that you're probably thinking, because if I was watching this video, it's what I would be thinking. One, when I'm boiling my water, it doesn't take that long. A couple minutes isn't a long time to sit by my stove and just cup my hands around it to try and block the wind. In fact, my hand is much bigger and probably going to be more effective than this little lip on the SOTO Amicus. And you're probably right. Putting your hand around there definitely makes a difference. I've done that many times, especially using the BRS, because we've just seen how susceptible it is to even low amounts of wind. But sometimes when I get to camp, I want to just start my water boiling and then go about setting up camp for a couple of minutes while that does its own thing. That might not bother you, but for me, I don't like to sit by my stove, especially because it should be said boiling water is actually more fuel efficient if you do it slowly. Backpacking stoves are most efficient when you use them at a 50% or even lower output. That said, I have to come clean and say that my tendency is to just crank it up and boil that water as fast as I can. But if you're trying to be fuel efficient because it's a long trip, you want to avoid resupply, or you just like saving fuel, that means on a windy day, you're going to have to sit by your stove for even longer doing this, 5 minutes plus, to wait for that water to boil. Now, there is one more side-by-side test I want to do, because I recently found from a company called, I think, Fat Cat's Stoves or something. I'll put a link in the description, but you can actually buy this cool little windscreen that you can use on a BRS. They make them custom for different types of stoves. The more popular ones, you can probably find whatever stove you have. Now, because the BRS is so bad in the wind, I thought I'd try this out to see if this makes any difference and brings the performance up to as good as, or maybe even better than, the Amicus. This windscreen, I think, was somewhere around 30 plus shipping, which means you're probably actually paying more total for the BRS and this than you would just for the Amicus. I do think that the total weight is still a little bit lighter, because these things together are only about 24 grams. So overall, you're still lighter with the BRS plus this, but your cost is basically the same. Let's see if it makes it as good as the Amicus in the wind. And while I screw the Amicus on this time, I've noticed almost every time I've screwed this on, there's fuel that leaks out. So let's see if it happens here. I don't think I've caught it on camera yet, but try and do this fast, make sure it's all the way closed. It is. Yep. I have never had a stove leak that much fuel when I'm putting it on. It's so much that I can feel it hitting my fingers, and a few times when I was going really slow, some liquid fuel, ooh, yeah, I can even smell it right now. So that's disappointing for a stove of this quality to have it lose that much fuel. The BRS, I feel like maybe sometimes does that, but not nearly as much. Let's try it right now. Yeah, nothing. The water is not as cold because it's been sitting out a little bit. Looks like it's about 50 degrees. So not as cold as the first few tests, but what we're really concerned about is the side-by-side. Put this on there. Got to start the wind. Let's check our wind speed. There we go. That's more even. Let's light this up. And that's at 107, and that's basically the same. So it seems like the BRS is keeping up with the Amicus right now. You can see it still feels like the BRS flame is really kind of all over the place. So there's the SOTO. The wind is definitely pushing the flame a little bit. The BRS flame kind of looks like it's all over, but that windscreen is definitely helping to contain it. 160. And that's also at 160, so basically the same. Yeah, it says 192, 194. That's over 200. All right, that's boiling. Oh. Woo. Let's turn the wind off. All right, so the boil times for the two were basically the same when you add this windscreen to the BRS. Now let's see what the fuel consumption is like. I will say, I'm gonna let these cool off for a second before I grab them. It was really hard to try and reach in, turn the BRS off. The wind in some ways sort of blows the flame downwards, and I couldn't just reach in there and turn it off. So that was a little bit of a pain. Wow, and it's actually, this is a lot warmer. Again, that flame was kind of getting blown everywhere. I can feel this one's warmer to the touch than this. The flame was definitely warming this one up. All right, while we wait for the temperature of this canister to come down so we can weigh them and compare them to see what the final fuel usage is, let's go over a summary of the performance. With no wind, the Amicus SOTO boiled water faster, but did use a little more fuel. But over time, that can really add up. It could also just be due to differences of not being able to dial them into the exact same output. Either way, that was the result of the first test. When we added wind, roughly 4-mile-an-hour wind, the flame on the BRS was all over the place and it had a really hard time getting water up to boiling. After 5 minutes, it still hadn't made it, and I'm not sure that it even would have. The flame on the SOTO Amicus was still nice and even, no issues with performance in that amount of wind. For the BRS, when we add the windscreen, it seemed to keep up with the SOTO Amicus just fine. So as far as overall performance goes, especially in real world conditions, the SOTO Amicus definitely seems to be a better stove, especially when it's on its own. You'll almost always be having some sort of wind on whatever trip you're on, so if you want something that's dependable without add-ons, the SOTO Amicus does better in the wind. That said, I do think this cool windscreen that you can get does make a really big difference. It makes the performance of the BRS just as good as the SOTO Amicus, or at least it did in this test, to where you wouldn't have to worry about trying to block the wind with your hands or doing something else, and you could just use your BRS in those same windy conditions. That does bring the total cost of the BRS up. And the other thing to think about, and the last point we're going to compare with both of these stoves, is how this impacts the packability of the BRS, if this is something you want to do. Let's talk about how easy it is to pack each of these stoves, including in different size pots, with a canister included. All right, let's start with a 750 milliliter pot. I always prefer to put my canister in the pot. Now let's put the stoves in. BRS goes in there just fine. That one has a little bit harder of a time fitting in here. If you loosen the bead a little bit, you can kind of shove it in just fine. So both of them fit in a 750 milliliter pot with a canister, no problem. The BRS, we should say you will also have to pack a lighter. That fits in there just fine. And if you want to pack one in here just in case, that does fit. It is a little bit tighter, but you can get it in there good enough that you can put your lid on. Here's the lid for this one, and here's the lid for this one. So both of them will pack into a 750 milliliter titanium pot with a canister, with a lighter, no problem. And both in the bag. With the BRS, this is a 550 milliliter pot. As long as you put the canister in upside down without the cap on it, you can also fit your stove and a mini Bic lighter, and the lid will go on. There's no way that you'd be able to fit the SOTO Amicus in a similar pot. You can see it's just too big. For my solo trips, I like taking a 550 milliliter pot. It just takes up less room, and that's a good thing. I also don't need to boil more water than what this will do anyway. The other thing we have to talk about with the BRS is, if you want to add this windscreen, how does that impact packability? You'd be able to fit all of this, no problem. This is not going to go in, but you can put your stove, lighter. I mean, this isn't really that much bulk. You can put it in your food bag maybe, or somewhere else, but you will have to pack this somewhere other than in your pot unless you want to bend it. So adding the windscreen, which is the only way to make the BRS perform at least as good as the SOTO Amicus in the wind, is going to make it so it loses its packability benefits. Now that these canisters have gotten back down to the same temperature or close to the same temperature, Let's weigh them one more time just to look at total fuel consumption. And rather than focusing on each individual boil, I want to talk about total fuel consumption for 3 total boils. So this is the BRS. It started originally at 213 grams. It's now at 174. So that's 39 grams of fuel for 3 boils, about 13 grams per boil. And for the SOTO Amicus, that's at 173. And this one started at 212, which means it actually also used 39 grams for 3 boils. So they both actually used the same amount of fuel, but remember, in the wind test without the screen on the BRS, it did not actually bring that water up to a boil. So especially in windy conditions, if you don't buy the additional windscreen, you're going to end up using more fuel with the BRS than you would with the SOTO Amicus. And that just makes sense because the SOTO Amicus is more efficient in the wind. So all of that said, which stove would you choose? Would you take the budget-friendly packable BRS 3000 or the SOTO Amicus that's more dependable in different conditions? I gotta say that for me, the BRS 3000 is probably still gonna be my go-to stove, only because it's more affordable, I'm cheap, and it's more packable. As I said, I like taking that smaller pot on my solo trips, so the BRS 3000 for me is the way to go. But if you disagree, I would love to know why in the comments. And remember, life is better with some dirt in it.